Sagittarius, the forgotten room. When your soul comes back to reclaim its light. You thought you'd forgotten, but your soul never did. There is a room inside you, Sagittarius, not locked but left untouched. A space you've walked past countless times, pretending you didn't notice the faint hum behind its door. It's where you've placed the memories you weren't ready to face, the feelings you told yourself you'd outgrown. But your soul doesn't forget. One quiet day, maybe while you're washing dishes, maybe in the stillness before sleep, light begins to slip through the cracks. It doesn't crash in or blind you. It seeps in like a slow sunrise. Warm, patient, familiar. This is not an invasion. It is an arrival. The light comes not to expose your wounds, but to live again in the spaces you thought could never heal. And in that moment you realize, you are not here to erase what happened. You are here to remember who you were before it did. If this message speaks to something deep within you, you're in the right place. I'm Sophia, and here at Zodiac Wisdom, we journey together into the landscapes of your soul, uncovering what's been buried, reclaiming what's been lost, and learning how to live with your whole heart. If you feel called to explore these truths with me, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so we can walk this path together. Your light is waiting, and it's time to open the door. Gate 1. You don't defeat the darkness, you stop running from it. Sagittarius, for so long you believed that healing meant conquering, that the only way to truly move forward was to push harder, to be stronger, to outpace the shadows that trailed behind you. You thought if you kept yourself busy enough, successful enough, happy-looking enough, you could leave the weight of your past somewhere far behind. But darkness does not dissolve when you outrun it. It follows in silence, matching your steps, waiting for the moment you slow down. And inevitably, you do. Not because you failed, but because the soul is not built for endless escape. One day, you find yourself too tired to keep up the performance. The smile that feels heavy on your face, the projects you no longer care about, the conversations that sound like echoes in an empty room. And in that stillness, something unexpected happens. The darkness sits down beside you, and for the first time, it does not feel like an enemy. You see the part of you that aches, that mourns, that carries the weight of what you've endured. It is not here to destroy you. It is here to call you home. The memories you've avoided, the emotions you've labeled as weakness, they are simply unopened letters from your own heart. Running from them only means running from yourself. And there's a cost to that. You start to feel a quiet disconnection from others, from joy, from your own reflection. You may find yourself saying, "I'm fine" 100 times a week, but each time it feels less believable. That is your soul tapping on the door you've ignored for too long. When you stop running, you give yourself permission to witness what's been waiting. And witnessing is different from reliving. It is the act of saying, "I see you. I know you happened. And I'm still here." This is the moment when you realize that the darkness was never chasing you. It was walking you back to the places you needed to reclaim. Think about a time you faced something you've been avoiding for years. A conversation with someone who hurt you. Opening a box of old photographs. Returning to a place that held painful memories. The anticipation was worse than the moment itself, wasn't it? The dread was heavier than the truth. In my work, I've seen so many souls discover this exact turning point. A woman once told me she'd spent a decade refusing to visit her childhood home because it held too many ghosts. But one day she returned. She walked through each room, feeling her pulse race, expecting to crumble under the weight of memory. Instead, she found herself placing her hand on the same wall she'd touched as a child, and she realized she was no longer that scared little girl. She had outgrown the shadows. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined her. She told me later, "I didn't win against the darkness. I just stopped pretending it wasn't there." And somehow that was enough. Sagittarius, your courage has never been about forcing the light to shine brighter. It has always been about sitting with the dark until it no longer frightens you. The moment you stop running, you stop reinforcing the belief that the pain is bigger than you. You stop feeding it the energy of fear. And in its place you find something surprising. Not emptiness but quiet. Not despair but a strange sense of safety. Because when you can exist in the same room as your own shadow without wanting to bolt, you have already transformed it. The journey of not running is not glamorous. There are no grand announcements, no visible trophies. It happens in moments others might not even notice, choosing to stay in the conversation instead of changing the subject, allowing the tears to fall instead of swallowing them back, admitting, "I'm not okay," and realizing the world doesn't end when you say it. These are acts of bravery, even if they look small from the outside. And here's the truth. When you stop running, you give your light a chance to find you again. You give the forgotten room in your soul permission to open, letting in air, letting in warmth. You begin to understand that the purpose of your pain was never to bury you. It was to prepare you for the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. A strength rooted in presence, in self-trust, in knowing that no matter what you face, you will not abandon yourself again. This is the beginning of the return, not to who you were before the hurt, but to the wholeness that can only be forged when you stand in both your light and your shadow without flinching. That is where true healing begins. That is where you start to live, not just survive. Gate 2. The feelings you called weakness are actually doors. Sagittarius, somewhere along the way, you learned to mistrust your own feelings. Maybe you were told that tears made you fragile. Maybe you were praised for your ability to stay strong, when inside you were breaking. Maybe you even came to believe that your sadness, your sensitivity, your moments of doubt were flaws to be corrected rather than signals to be honored. So you built walls. You kept your voice steady even when your heart was trembling. You avoided the quiet moments because you knew that in stillness, the feelings you had buried would try to surface. And you told yourself this was strength, but deep down you knew it was survival. The truth is, those emotions you've been avoiding are not your enemies. They are doors. And like any door, they require you to pause, to notice, to decide whether you will walk through. Depression, anxiety, grief, these are not signs of your failure. They are invitations from your soul, gently but persistently whispering, "I need you to come back to me." That heaviness in your chest, the lump in your throat, the tears that appear without warning, these are not breakdowns. They are breakthroughs in disguise. They are the body's way of releasing what the mind has tried too hard to control. I've spoken with so many people who have mistaken their emotional waves for proof that they were falling apart. One man once told me, "Every time I feel sad for no reason, I think something is wrong with me." I asked him to consider something different. What if the sadness wasn't random at all? What if it was his younger self still waiting for someone to listen? Over time, he began to sit with that sadness rather than push it away. He realized it carried memories, moments he brushed aside but that still wanted acknowledgement. And once he gave them space, the sadness softened. You see, feelings that are ignored don't disappear. They go underground. They become tension in your shoulders, headaches that arrive without explanation, sleepless nights where your mind spins but never lands. They live in your body, waiting for you to notice them. And when you finally do, when you allow yourself to cry without judgment, to name your fears without shame, you open the door to healing. Sagittarius, you've always been a seeker of truth, but sometimes the deepest truths aren't found in faraway adventures or profound external changes. Sometimes they're hiding in the places you've been taught to overlook, the trembling, the doubt, the ache you can't quite name. Your emotions are not here to weaken you. They are here to lead you back to the parts of yourself you've locked away. Think of it like this. Imagine walking through a house you've lived in for years, but always avoiding one room because you fear what's inside. Maybe it's dusty, maybe it's cluttered, maybe you're afraid of what memories might linger there. But the day you finally open the door, you find sunlight streaming in through a small window you didn't even know existed. That light was always there. You just needed to be willing to see it. Your emotions are that room, and your willingness to feel them is the key. It's not about drowning in them or letting them control your every move. It's about creating a space where they can speak and you can listen without judgment. You don't need to analyze them to death or demand that they make perfect sense. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply saying, "I will sit with you for a while." When you begin to treat your emotions not as intruders but as guides, you shift the entire relationship you have with yourself. You stop seeing sadness as weakness and start seeing it as a signpost pointing toward what still needs care. You stop fearing vulnerability and start recognizing it as the birthplace of connection, both with others and with yourself. And slowly, the walls you built to keep the pain out start letting the light in. This is not easy work. There will be days when you want to slam the door shut again, when the wave feels too big, when the ache feels too sharp. But remember, you are not the same person you were when you first built those walls. You are stronger now, wiser now, more capable of holding both the pain and the peace at once. Every time you walk through one of these emotional doors, you reclaim another piece of yourself. And that is how the forgotten room in your soul begins to fill with light. Not all at once, but one gentle step at a time, each feeling honored, each truth acknowledged. Gate 3. You don't need a new version of yourself, you need to return to the true one. Sagittarius, for so long you've been chasing the idea of reinvention. You've thought that healing meant becoming someone entirely different. Someone stronger, calmer, more together. Someone who never makes mistakes or feels lost. You've stood in front of mirrors, physical and emotional, and wondered what it would take to finally become enough. You've consumed books, workshops, and endless advice telling you to transform, to improve, to evolve into a shinier version of yourself. But here's the truth that lands softer, yet deeper than any self-help mantra. You don't need to become someone else. You need to come back to who you've always been. There's a version of you, not an aspirational dream, not a hypothetical ideal, but a real breathing, laughing you who existed before the world told you who you had to be. This was the you who dared to speak your dreams out loud without worrying whether they sounded realistic. The you who said yes to adventures before fear had time to draft excuses. The you who loved without calculating the risk. Somewhere along the way, layers began to cover this essence. Expectations from family, society, relationships. Lessons learned from heartbreak and betrayal. The silent weight of feeling misunderstood. Each experience added a new coat of armor until one day, you realized you could barely feel the world, or yourself, beneath it. I once worked with a woman who told me she was desperate to find her purpose. She kept reinventing herself. New jobs, new cities, new relationships, yet always felt empty. One day, I asked her to describe herself at age 10. She lit up as she spoke. The girl who wrote poems in a treehouse, who spent hours rescuing stray animals, who believed she could talk to the wind. That light in her eyes told me everything. Her purpose wasn't something she had to invent. It was something she had to remember. Sagittarius, the truest healing happens not when you perfect yourself, but when you allow yourself to be imperfect without shame. You don't need to wear the right mask for every room. You don't need to keep performing the role of the strong one, to be worthy of love or respect. You are allowed to be messy, to cry, to admit you don't know, to change your mind. Returning to yourself is not a regression, it's a reclamation. Think about how a sculptor works. They don't build the statue by adding more and more material. They chip away at what's unnecessary until the form that was always inside emerges. You are that sculpture. The essence of you, wise, passionate, loving, has been here all along. The work now is to gently remove what is not you. The need to be perfect, the belief that you must earn your worth, the fear of being too much or not enough. The beauty of coming back to your true self is that it doesn't require external validation. You don't need anyone to agree that you're better now. You simply feel more like you. And the people who are meant for you will recognize you in this state, not because you've impressed them, but because you've allowed them to meet the real you. There is a freedom in no longer chasing a mirage of perfection. When you drop the performance, you gain energy you didn't realize you were losing. Conversations feel lighter. Decisions feel clearer. You start saying no to what drains you and yes to what excites you without apologizing. And slowly, life begins to fit you again. Like a favorite sweater you thought you'd outgrown but realize you've simply been keeping at the back of the closet. Returning to yourself also means embracing your contradictions. You can be brave and scared at the same time. You can be wise and still learning. You can carry wounds and still offer healing. Wholeness doesn't mean every piece of you is polished. It means every piece of you belongs. And here's the secret. The new life you've been seeking is not built by abandoning your old self, but by welcoming her back. She's been waiting in the wings, watching you run toward every finish line except the one that leads home. Now she's ready to step forward, not as a stranger, but as the truest companion you'll ever have. When you allow yourself to be seen as you truly are, unedited, unarmored, something shifts in the way you move through the world. You stop asking, will they like me? And start asking, do I like the way I'm living? And in that question lies your freedom. You realize you are not behind in life. You are right on time for the most important reunion of all. The one with your own soul. This is the heart of Gate 3. Not reinvention but remembrance. Not becoming someone new, but coming home to the person you were always meant to be. And when you do, Sagittarius, the forgotten room in your soul won't just be open. It will be filled with the warmth of your own presence, finally fully returned. Gate 4 light doesn't come to blind, it comes to stay. Sagittarius, for much of your journey, you've chased light as if it lived somewhere outside of you. In the eyes of a lover who once made you feel seen, in the recognition that came after your hardest work, in the fleeting high of accomplishing what others said you couldn't. And when those lights dimmed, as they inevitably did, you felt the hollow ache of believing that the glow had gone with them. But what you're discovering now is that the most enduring light doesn't flash, doesn't demand attention, doesn't vanish when circumstances change. It is steady, it is gentle, and it is already yours. When you opened that forgotten room in your soul, you expected perhaps a dramatic flood, the cinematic moment where everything suddenly felt fixed. Instead, you found something quieter, a warmth that seemed to wrap itself around your heart, not with urgency but with a patience that said, "I am not going anywhere." This light doesn't shout over the noise, it hums beneath it. It doesn't ask you to perform, it meets you exactly as you are, in your sweatpants with your doubts on the days you still feel small, and it stays. I once knew a man who had spent years in and out of burnout. He kept telling me he just needed one big break to finally feel alive again. When that break came, he was lit up for a while, but as soon as the applause faded, the exhaustion crept back in. It wasn't until he began carving out an hour each morning for himself, to sit in silence, to breathe, to write without judgment, that something shifted. He told me one day, "I don't feel lit up like fireworks anymore. I feel lit up like embers." And I knew then he had found it, the kind of light that doesn't depend on a stage, but on staying close to yourself. That's what's happening for you now, Sagittarius. You're realizing that your light is not a spotlight. It's a hearth fire. It's not meant to dazzle and burn out. It's meant to warm and endure. This changes how you approach everything. You stop saying yes to things that drain you for the sake of temporary approval. You start choosing commitments that feel sustainable, relationships that don't require you to dim yourself, and practices that nurture you in the long run. You no longer need constant confirmation that you're on the right path, because you can feel it. This inner light also changes how you relate to darkness. You don't panic when challenges come. You've learned that shadows are simply places your light hasn't reached yet. You've stopped trying to erase every trace of hardship from your story. Instead, you've begun to weave them into your truth, not as stains, but as threads that give your light depth and color. And here's the most beautiful part. When your light is steady, you stop fearing that it will be taken from you. Even if someone walks away, even if life changes without warning, the fire inside remains. You can share it freely because you know its source is infinite. This is the kind of radiance that makes people feel safe around you, not because you're always cheerful or perfectly healed, but because you carry an unshakable knowing that you will be okay, no matter what. So now, when you enter a room, you don't have to announce your presence. You don't have to outshine anyone or prove your worth. The light you carry speaks for you, and it's the kind of light people feel more than they see. They may not even be able to name what's different about you, only that they feel a little warmer, a little calmer when you're near. This is the gift of Gate 4. Understanding that light is not a performance, but a homecoming. It's not about reaching for a peak moment that will fade. It's about cultivating a glow that remains through every season. And the truth, Sagittarius, is that you have always had this light. The difference now is that you've stopped searching for it outside yourself. You've let it take root inside the quiet places of your soul, and you've promised to tend it. Not just when life is good, but especially when it's not. In the end, the forgotten room in your soul isn't just filled with light again. It is the light. And you are no longer afraid it will leave because now you understand. The light never leaves the one who remembers how to stay with themselves. Conclusion: when you don't need the answer, you already know. Sagittarius, you've traveled a long road only to find yourself back at the beginning, but not the same. You've returned to the place inside you that always knew the truth, the quiet chamber where your soul keeps its most sacred wisdom. There was a time you believed you had to earn peace, that you had to solve every puzzle, heal every wound, and make sense of every heartbreak before you could rest. But now you see that peace was never a prize at the end of the race. It was here all along, waiting for you to stop running. You no longer demand explanations from the past. You don't need the people who misunderstood you to finally see your heart. You don't need closure tied neatly with a bow, because you've realized closure is not something given to you by others. It's something you create when you decide the story is complete. And you, Sagittarius, have decided. The chapter is closed. The door is unlocked. The light is on. This doesn't mean you'll never feel the pull of old shadows. They may still whisper from time to time, but now you know how to answer them. Not with fear or resistance, but with presence. You can say, I see you. You're part of my story. But you're not where I live anymore. And then you turn back toward the life you are choosing now, the one built not on proving but on belonging first to yourself and then to the world in a way that feels true. The forgotten room is no longer forgotten. It has become a sanctuary, a place where you can sit with your whole self, the light, the shadow, the scars, the dreams, and know that nothing about you needs to be hidden. This is the kind of power that doesn't roar, but hums steadily through your veins. The kind of strength that isn't about endurance but about alignment. So as you step forward from here, don't look for signs that you are ready. You are. Don't wait for permission to start living the life that feels like yours. You already have it. You gave it to yourself the moment you opened that door and let the light in. If these words found you today, trust that it's because you were meant to hear them. And if they spoke to something deep inside you, I invite you to stay connected, like, share and subscribe to this space, where we walk together through the cycles of the stars and the quiet revolutions of the soul. Because this isn't the end of your journey, Sagittarius. It's the beginning of living it fully, without apology, without pretending, and without fear.